last year floods have taught us, that how badly Pakistan is actually impacted.
Institute of Oceanology, which said that by 2060 Karachi will be underwater. Many of our members have been working in terms of recycling the plastics and the wastage. As far as the environment is concerned, we think that our laws are not as advanced as it should be.
Pakistan is in a process of really figuring it out, how to go about it. The overall ecosystem is not geared to really measure the overall carbon emissions. OICCI has been very actively working towards creating an awareness around climate change.
Hello everyone, today we are here with a very special installment of Front Seat to Climate Change. We have a delegation from Pakistan attending COP28. This is the Overseas Investors Chamber of Commerce and Industries. And right now I have the Secretary General, Abdul Aleem, joining us. Welcome to the show, sir. So you're here to join the COP28, and we know that Pakistani government is very active here. Private sector not so much. We have had a few representations here and there, but we still don't know within what the industry or trade or corporate sector within Pakistan is doing to decarbonize, and a lot of it is usually driven by regulation. And we know that international regulation, particularly in the European Union, is becoming more stringent for exporters. So I think that would be the starting point of this conversation, that what are Pakistani businesses doing, particularly to prepare for this, to remain competitive internationally. And do you think that our local regulations are sort of enforcing enough laws or regulations on them to make sure that they become more compliant?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to take this question. Basically, international regulations have been gradually being tightened up, subject to the knowledge that has been shared on the impact of the climate change. So your question as to what the private sector has been doing, there are two segments of it. One is the export segment, which directly gets these guidelines from their importers in third world in developed countries. So they've been at it on an individual basis, company-wide basis, and they have done a lot. I know, for example, some of the textile mills have done a lot of work in reducing their carbon emission and the exposure to carbon carbon exposure. So they've been doing a lot in terms of what the OICCI members have done. They have been working on three fronts. Basically, they've been trying to reduce their in terms of energy, they've been trying to promote green energy a lot. And I have many members who have moved gradually on solar and other forms of less harmful energy sources. And similarly, many of our members have been working in terms of recycling the plastics and the wastage. So a lot more has been done. So to come back to your question about regulation, I think Pakistan has not had such a stringent regulation as such, but being a part of the international community itself, that is the whole purpose, that we should try and improve our standards in Pakistan. So it is being done in Pakistan, but maybe not as extensively as people expect. But as far as speaking on behalf of the multinationals, I think these companies, our members, have done quite a good job on this, and they are still doing it. We, obviously we work very closely with the government, and one thing is making the law, the other thing is implementing the law. And we, as a chamber, we are working with all the authorities that whatever regulations they introduce, first of all, that those regulations have to be of the international standard, but at the same time it should have a reality check to our environment. But at the same time, we are also asking the authorities to implement it in a professional manner. However, as far as the environment is concerned, we think that our laws are not as advanced as it should be. and whatever they are not being implemented across the board. So I'm not speaking on behalf of multinationals only, I'm speaking on behalf, this is our observation, that a lot more can be done. But coming back to OICCI members, I think we think that they are being part of the foreign parent companies. They have a much higher standards, and they are on their own doing many things to, whether the law is there or not, they want to match up to the international standards.
So moving on, so we have a lot of examples within region. Pakistan, we have a big neighbor on our east, and then in the north we also have China, where the corporate sector, even though slightly owned by the government, is doing a lot in terms of capacity building of the local population, both human resource development, but also funding specific research into innovative technologies, clean technologies, also funding drives to clean up water, air pollution, those sort of things. They have startup funds which they direct to specific enterprises which are doing this sort of work. So in Pakistan's context, is similar work being done within OICCI or members of the OICCI which are contributing in these ways?
In terms of your question about research, we are not aware of any dedicated research on the subjects that you have mentioned. But what I can say that OICCI has taken the lead in terms of raising the issue at a much broader level. And since 2022, last year we organized first international climate conference in Pakistan, where many international speakers, our members, they all raised this issue and participated in this. Similarly, this year in November, also on November 1st, we had a big international conference on climate change matters, and that is the whole purpose of these two conferences. Is basically that instead of complaining that nothing is being done in Pakistan of that international standard, we took the lead on behalf of the multinationals who are here, and as a service to the country also, to raise this issue as to what is happening on plastic, what is happening on carbon emission, what is happening on in thinking through that how will the country be able to manage the negative impact of the climate change that is taking place. If you notice, for example, this year we have experienced the very unpredicted, heat in Karachi, for example, we have experienced which was never experienced in last 70 years, plus 70 years. So similarly, there are research which say there was a 2015 research by Institute of Oceanology, which said that by 2060 the Karachi will be underwater. If those sort of research can be taken on face value, then obviously we have to work fast and do something. So we are raising this issue, but I agree with you that there is an opportunity for some sort of a dedicated research, but not to our knowledge that any institution has taken that initiative. But can be done. But I think at this stage we are focusing more on spreading the significance of this issue to the much larger audience.
So our conversation continues with the leadership of OICCI. Now we have the president of the chamber, Mr. Amir Paracha, and he's also here from Pakistan, and he's actually going to moderate an event on Pakistan's contributions and industries sort of preparation in regards to decarbonization at the Blue Pavilion in Pakistan's Pavilion tomorrow for COP28. So I was having a conversation with your own colleague previously, and we are discussing regulation. So I think regulation is a big topic, not just at COP, but generally we've seen over the past 2 years that especially European Union really making their own regulations very tight. Within Pakistan, we've seen the green banking guidelines come up. We've seen SCCP issue those draft ESG rules as well. And a lot of it is voluntary, but it's building up to something. So that's my question, that in Pakistan's regard, especially multinationals, but also your smaller counterparts within the country and members of the OICCI, and also because a lot of the business community is focused in certain parts of the country, are they well prepared? Have they the capacity to really prepare themselves and go into this? And from my assessment, it's going to happen within the next 5 to 6 years. So are we going to be able to make that shift during that period?
First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to really try addressing the ongoing challenges with the climate change. With reference to your question, yeah, we all know that overall globally, regulations are getting tighter by the day. Lately, the CBAM, which is a cross-border adjustment mechanism being introduced by EU, potentially can have implication on any exports from Pakistan into EU, because they are going to be actually taxing it. Now, there are two ways to go about it. One way is the importing country in EU, pay tax to the local government, but that's going to be borne by the importer and no implication on Pakistan. But there's other way about it that Pakistan starts to tax the local exporter and make it a part of their revenue. Ideally, that's the way it should be, rather than it becoming a part of the revenue for the European nation. It should become a part of revenue for our country. But the implication for the exporters, it will going to increase the cost of production, and there is a possibility of uncompetitiveness. So it's a very slippery slope. It's being newly introduced, and I think so Pakistan is in a process of really figuring it out how to go about it. Having said that, I think so over the last few years, particularly textile sectors have started to really comply, because there are stringent conditions being imposed by all the brands which are brand in Europe or in US to comply by the sustainability guidelines. So the textile sector have actually done a lot in this space, and I think it's going to get tighter and tighter. The regime in Pakistan is still in a very nascent stage. A lot need to be done, and I think so a lot of readiness is required from the Pakistani government and the regulators to prepare Pakistani exporters to comply with the global standards. And increasingly, the demand from the government is how we actually export more and more and bring more and more dollar, given we are actually dollar shortage. So I think so it's going to be new space, and we need to really get prepared when it comes to regulations.
So coming towards sustainability, we know that, as you mentioned, textiles, and we have a couple of names, and let's not name them, but we have, especially those are listed on the PSX, they produce integrated reports, ESG reports, and all of that sort. But from my own personal reading of the situation, it's sort of, again, very, very broad-minded, the chief executives of a particular company who are sort of open-minded about this, they're the ones doing it. And even when you say voluntary, it's like a small proportion who want to volunteer for it. So within Pakistan, are companies doing the proper ESG reporting? And do you think that there is enough capacity within the local reporting firms and all of that to really do it? And if there isn't, do you think Pakistan is a big enough market for that sort of talent to jump into there?
So I think, again, this ESG reporting, there's been, over the last couple of years, there's a lot of awareness being created around ESG reporting. In 2022, SECP also introduced what are the standards and the compliances when it comes to disclosure for ESG, but it's not been made mandatory till now. Maybe in the coming years, going to actually made mandatory. Plus, the overall ecosystem is not geared to really measure the overall carbon emissions. For example, in order to basically make disclosures, you have to make disclosures by scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. To be honest, the overall environment is not advanced enough. Neither there has been any regulation. Yes, the foreign companies are trying to follow the requirements by their headquarters, by their principals, so they are trying to align. But I think so at this point in time, there's not much comfort to disclose. There's no regulation. It's not being made mandatory. Neither we have any ecosystem. Neither we have any companies who are actually doing these monitoring services for the organizations to help them monitor scope-wise measurement for any kind of carbon emission.
So I think I've been curious about this because you see a lot of young talent in Pakistan, and there is one side which is very corporate minded. They will go and do the, your management side, that sort of skill. But in the international domain, we've seen that there is a certain sustainability talent that is being groomed. And it's increasingly becoming a part of, workforce trainings and capacity enhancement, that universities are also doing it. And we actually have the example of India's IIMs, which have introduced a lot of green career skill building opportunities for them. Pakistan is still going to be, you mentioned that the capacity doesn't exist, but do you think that the talent is being created, and in the future within your own workforce, you might see that sort of talent being inculcated and being into leadership roles as well?
Well, one thing I would like to start by saying, this upcoming talent, or these millennials, they are a lot more enlightened than the previous generation. They are lot more socially responsible than the previous generation. So their overall habits are more compliant with these sustainability standards. But when it comes to particularly, is the talent being created? I don't think so that in the universities, there are particular curriculum that students are actually kind of embarking on to get trained and build capacity, in this particular field. So I think so, not like this, but I think so over the last few years, there's been a lot of dialogues, there's been a lot of conferences, there's been a lot of conversations around how we need to actually cut down on our carbon footprint, be in terms of the emissions or be in terms of plastic, or how we need to have a better practices when it comes to water conservation. So I think so there's been a lot of dialogue, there's been a lot of awareness building, even the millennials and youngsters are coming in. I think the most encouraging part is these upcoming students, they are actually going into startups. And these startups are actually getting into spaces which is more around how we can actually produce something which is environmentally responsible. So I personally have come across many students have actually come up with R&D stuff where actually they're using reprocessed plastic, mixing it with cement, and actually trying to create some concrete stuff, or actually trying to use it in the road production. So I think so there's a lot of, again, enlightenment. But I think so we really need to have innovation center. We need to have an R&D center being funded by the government of Pakistan to really prepare our upcoming talent for any such kind of initiatives. The reality is this is the future. The reality is that if any organization, they want to really make it big or they want to stay compliant, they need to have the right talent who is actually trained into this green climate or socially responsible climate areas.
So my last question, I think, is something to really close off the conversation with, is that you are one of the delegations, only private sector delegations from Pakistan and also in the region, because I've not seen other private sectors participating like this. And you also organize the Pakistan Climate Conference. How has your experience been, given that internationally corporates are seen as the actors who have to play the biggest role? And within Pakistan's dynamics, I agree that it's still, the contributions to emissions. For example, private transport is the biggest in Pakistan. So industries come lower, and then certain multinationals even come lower. So what's your drive to be doing the Pakistan Climate Conference and also being here? What are your expectations from COP28, and what message do you want to deliver here?
So let me slightly, give you a context. Over the last 2 years, OICCI has been very actively working towards creating an awareness around climate change. We all know that Pakistan happens to be one of the top 10 countries which are the most vulnerable to climate change. Our contribution to climate is very small, which is 0.9 per ton per capita emission. But we are the worst hit. Last year, floods have taught us, that how badly Pakistan is actually impacted. And on top of it, Pakistan happened to be bordering with 2 countries which happen to be the highest emitters in the world. Now, the reality of the matter is that it's a monster, yeah? And public sector alone, the government alone can't handle it. Private sector has to lean in and work with government to manage this monstrous task. What OICCI has been doing, that we started off in 2022 with the first of its kind Pakistan Climate Conference, and we got people from the regulations, from the government of Pakistan, from the ministry, from SDPI, from private sector, and created a platform to have a dialogue. Yeah, how to manage this menace and the threat that Pakistan is actually facing every single second. And that was very successful. And then it was followed up with a white paper that we actually put it together, and it was presented to the Minister of Climate Change at that time. And we followed it up with the Pakistan Climate Conference 2.0 last month. And again, we basically talked about how we need to work together in order to address this. The purpose of OICCI, which is a body of 210 multinationals and 14 different sectors from 35 different countries, to now participate with MOCC and with SDPI to form a partnership. And what's important is, while we have actually triggered this dialogue process of the last 2 years, we have not yet basically sat together in a collective policy making. The policy making is still happening, separately, in the public sector. And the problem is, once policy is developed without consulting the private sector and they bring it to the private sector for implementation, there's a resistance because it may not be ideal to implement because it's not being collectively made. So what we want is that while dialogue has happened, we move to this next step, which together we do the policy making, we agree on the roadmap, we sign it off together, and then we actually move on to the implementation. When you move to implementation, the biggest hurdle is how you fund it. We know that our caretaker finance minister, Dr. Shimshad Akhtar, in the last private conference have told that in order to meet our NDC targets, Pakistan requires $348 billion by 2030. Now we all know our overall GDP size is $350 billion. So we have to get this funding. We don't have that funding. So while public sector is actually trying to engage all the developmental finance institutions to get funding, the private sector is going to help public sector unlock climate green financing. And there are different modules available. In Pakistan, we do not have any voluntary carbon market available. We do not have any, debt for nature swaps available. We do not have proper carbon rating market available. We do not have a proper, nature-based funding available. So I think the private sector will work along with public sector in order to really build this end-to-end ecosystem where the international private sector and also local private sector come in, and engage with the green banks, issue green bonds, blue bonds, and then build this whole market the way it's been built in the developed set of the market. So the whole idea, partnering with MOCC and representing the private sector at the COP28 session tomorrow, is to really show our keenness, our interest to partner with the public sector and then work with them. And I think finally the last piece is the civil community, and they need to lead in. So when we three work together, that's the way we actually can address this big problem which is staring at us to be solved.
So thank you so much for joining, Amir Saab, and your whole team is, I feel that they're onto something here, and a lot more needs to be done from other private sector bodies as well. Civil society, as you've rightly mentioned, that we have this gap between the public, civil society and private sector, and at some point in time, someone has to come up and say that you guys can't be in silos anymore. Come and talk about this stuff together. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that your message at COP28 and then in further conferences in Pakistan is well taken, and we try to do something that increases the sustainable development in Pakistan and helps us become much more resilient to climate change.